You don't find history in textbooks anymore. You find it in the back of a local taxi, sandwiched between a market woman's produce and a student's backpack. Recently, I listened to a conversation that stopped me cold. Two elderly men were sitting behind me. The old man's voice was heavy with sadness and terror. He said, "If Cecil John Rhodes and Barney Barnato were alive today, they would be very proud of the modern native South African." I am a history lover, so my ears perked up. The old man continued. He explained the oldest trick in the colonial playbook. He said, "The best way to conquer someone is to get inside their mind. Force your cultures and traditions upon them. Make them think and act as you do." I listened carefully. He laid out a history I could follow and attest to. He began by explaining the mission behind creating an entity called South Africa, an entity that never existed before 1910. Before I reached my stop, he asked a question that haunted me. Is it possible that the system has also taught the native citizens its ways? This documentary is my answer to that question. To understand the cloud hanging over us, we have to go back to the sea. For centuries, European nations were desperate to bypass the Silk Road. They wanted to escape the high taxes of the Ottoman Empire. They needed a direct route to Asia. In the late 15th century, Portugal ruled the South Atlantic and Indian Oceans. They blocked everyone else. But by the early 17th century, Britain and the Netherlands became naval superpowers. They aggressively broke Portugal's monopoly. This fight intensified over the centuries. It culminated in major military conflicts on South African soil during the Napoleonic Wars of 1795 and 1806. The British crushed the Dutch. But here is the critical truth. Britain saw it fit to negotiate with the Dutch. They agreed to merge their colonies into one entity. The goal was not unity for the people. The goal was to streamline the extraction of mineral wealth. They wanted to send it directly back to the British Empire. Before 1910, the region was a chaotic mess. There were competing railroad systems. There were differing custom tariffs. There were clashing local tax structures. The solution was centralization. Imperial planners knew that deep-level mining could only be profitable if it was heavily centralized. So, in 1910, they unified the Cape, Natal, Transvaal, and the Orange Free State. They formed a single nation under British oversight. This created a standardized economy. They built connected railway lines from the mines straight to the coastal ports. This ensured smooth, high-volume exports back to Britain. But there was a deliberate poison pill in the Constitution. The 1910 Union Constitution stripped black South Africans of their political rights. Why? Because a citizen can demand a fair wage. A laborer cannot. This political exclusion allowed the state to legally compress African wages. It guaranteed an unending supply of cheap, compliant migrant labor. Initially, African kingdoms were self-sufficient. They survived through farming and livestock. Men had no reason to go into dangerous mines. So the colonial government introduced the hut tax and the poll tax in the late 1800s. These taxes matured in the Union. They had to be paid strictly in British cash currency. This forced millions of rural African men to leave their homesteads. They traveled to the mines just to earn the money required to pay the state taxes. Once these workers arrived at the mines, they were stripped of their freedom of movement. To keep costs minimal and prevent unionization, they were forced to live in secure, prison-like barracks. These barracks were built right next to the mine shafts. Mine owners provided the bare minimum of food. They gave shared concrete bunks and basic medical care. Because the workers' families remained in the rural homelands, the mining companies argued they only needed to pay a single man's bachelor wage. This completely evaded the cost of supporting a worker's family. To prevent mines from competing against one another for workers, the mining houses formed the Witwatersrand Native Labour Association, or WNLA for short. This operated as a massive recruitment monopoly. They fixed African wages at an artificially low flat rate across all gold mines. When local workers resisted these low wages, the WNLA set up recruitment networks stretching deep into Mozambique, Lesotho, Malawi, and Zimbabwe. This ensured a continuous, desperate supply of cheap foreign labor. The state backed the mining companies with strict legislated control. African workers were legally mandated to carry an internal passport. If a worker tried to quit due to dangerous conditions or low pay, it was treated as a criminal offense. They were arrested. The Mines and Works Act of 1911 legally banned black workers from ever being promoted to skilled or managerial positions. This trapped them permanently in low-wage, high-risk physical labor. The old man in the taxi was right. This migrant labor system did not just feed the mines. It provided the exact spatial, legal and economic blueprint, the blueprint that the National Party formalized into apartheid in 1948. This system was an enemy to the natives, but instead of the system being abolished, the natives wanted to be part of the entity. This led to upheavals and brutality, culminating in 1994. In that year, the native people were finally given the privilege to participate. They gained full rights to become citizens under the entity. But here is the sad reality the old man was hinting at. The entity never changed its cause. It was still serving its former master. Some of the natives became the managers and supervisors, but the system of the entity was limited. It was established to serve a minority, the British and the Dutch. So when the natives were integrated, the system became overloaded. Consider the ultimate irony of the South African system. It was designed to exploit black labor while denying black people entry into the formal modern economy. As the country modernized, it became impossible to run a 20th century capitalist economy using a 19th century colonial labor model. The system proved to be an economic impossibility. It forced white business elites and politicians to realize that if they did not dismantle the system, the economy would completely collapse. As the native people began to view themselves as second-class citizens, they refused to be paid little money. The law was now protecting them. The impact of this was that the market saw it fit to get cheap labor elsewhere. They wanted to replace the previous cheap labor. This is where the dispute amongst the people of the African continent began. The sad part now is that the South African people, who are now part of the entity, are applying the exact same tactics, the tactics which were imposed by the former rulers, Britain and the Dutch. This has resulted in the hatred of foreigners we are witnessing in recent times. The main problem is that the native people have adopted a foreign system, a system which has nothing to do with improving their livelihood. In turn, the system has transformed them to think like the former leaders. And who else is there to attack, other than the vulnerable other African brothers? We see it in the looting of shops. We see the violence against families from other African nations. We look across the border at a fellow African and see a threat. We have been trained to compete for the leftovers of a system that was never designed to feed us all. We have become the enforcers of the very borders we once fought to tear down. As I got off the taxi, the old man's question hung in the air. Is it possible the system has taught the native citizens its ways? The honest answer is yes, but that is not the end of the story. A lesson learned can be unlearned. A system absorbed can be rejected. The cloud hanging over us is the narrative of superiority and inferiority. But history is a stubborn teacher. It reminds us that before the Union of South Africa was a concept, before the Dutch and British drew their borders, the African was already a trader, a traveller, and a kin. The kingdoms of Great Zimbabwe, Mapungubwe, and the broader Swahili coast did not see the Limpopo as a wall. They saw it as a road. To remind modern South Africans who they really are, we must go back to the question Rhodes and Barnato failed to ask. They thought they conquered us when they made us carry passes and speak their languages. But they didn't conquer us, they just interrupted us. Who are we? We are not the managers of the colonial engine. We are the soil beneath it. We are the voices that existed before the 1910 merger. And we will be the voices that transcend the overloaded machine. The native is not the enemy of the foreigner. The native is the human being who looked into the mirror the master held up. They saw a distorted image, but they are finally looking away from that mirror. They are looking to see the village waiting behind them. The ultimate conquest is not the taking of land, it is the taking of memory. To reclaim the continent, we must first reclaim the narrative. Let the taxi drive on. The conversation is just beginning, and this time we are writing the script.